and welcome to the Happier Marriage Podcast, a podcast for spouses longing to have a happier marriage so they can feel more connected, desired, and supported. Now, to start the show, here is your host and Sherpa, licensed marriage and family therapist and certified relationship coach, Kingsley Grant.
Thanks for joining me on the Happier Marriage Secrets podcast. This is episode 37, and in this episode, I'll be sharing with you the 5 realistic and clear expectations that can create a happier marriage. Now, we're starting a new theme for this month entitled Managing Expectations and Setbacks. So you want to make sure that you don't miss any of the episodes that will come under this series. So you want to subscribe to the show today so you don't miss any other future episodes. Now, if you have missed any of the past episodes of this podcast, let me strongly encourage you to not only bookmark this podcast so you can quickly access the past shows and current ones, but also that you might be able to be up to date, right? So one of the things I suggest is go to the happiermarriagesecrets.com, the website, and you can have access to all the podcasts and blog posts and anything else that's there. So I want to encourage you to make sure that you have that marked, happiermarriagesecrets.com. Now, if you're listening for the first time, let me say this. You may or may not agree with all that you will hear, and quite frankly, I don't expect you to. Why? Because you have your own mind, and you as a listener of this show is smart enough to be able to think through things yourself and come up with different ideas. So I know that you may see things a bit different, but I want you to humor me and listen to the way that I present, because it's going to be different than what is out there. You're not going to hear me regurgitating the things that almost everybody else is saying. I may be a bit, kind of rebellious to some degree and share things that you may not be here. Like today's episode, you're going to hear 5 of the least talked about things. And in this episode, as an example of how my way of presenting, and you'll see as you listen through this episode. So you might be triggered by some of what I'll say on this episode. But remember, that's one of the purpose of this show, to stir things up and then to create for you an opportunity to start thinking. Because again, I challenge the mindset. I challenge your cognitive ability. I challenge the things that are status quo. I challenge the things that are just, we've always done it this way kind of things, right? I challenge those things. So you may be triggered. And I want to encourage you just to hang in there, because I'm going to always take you in for what I call a solid landing. And you can always make comments. And when you see the post, you can DM me or email or make comments on this podcast at wherever you see the show posted. Now, so this show is brought to you by KingsleyGrant.com. And our hope is that you will be challenged, inspired, and encouraged in this episode as in every other episode. So stay tuned.
So, the big question is this. How is it possible that you have a happier marriage when you feel like you've tried everything? Your spouse isn't making an effort. You're exhausted. You feel like giving up, or there's so much hurt that's taken place between you and your spouse. That is the question, and this podcast will give you the answers.
What's up, ladies and gentlemen of Happier Marriage World? I hope you're ready for another round of the Happier Marriage Podcast. Today, we're talking about 5 realistic and clear expectations that can create a happier marriage. So just to remind you that you can also watch videos, episodes of topics like this on my YouTube channel at Kingsley Grant. So you can always find other topics that I've covered, and maybe including something like this as well there. And I have also YouTube shorts that you can get quick synopsis of different topics I've discussed in digestible form, in very digestible form. So make sure you'll go there. And when you go to that channel, okay, I ask you to do 3 things. Smash the subscribe button, click on the like button, and the notification bell so you won't miss out on any of the video broadcasts as well. So let me suggest that you do those 3 things there, right? Now, I have some exciting things in the works that I'll be sharing with you real soon, but it has to do with a deck of communication cards. I call it Connect Strong, and it's 54 cards, which includes a QR code card they can scan to get the how to use the cards effectively. And these cards are actually, I just got the first printing of that, and as of this episode, so I want to tell you more about that as I unbox the cards, and then I'll be showcasing that on a video. So I'll tell you more about that in our next episodes. So stay tuned for that, right? So as you can see, a lot is going on in my world, but I want to make sure you get a special gift just for listening to the end of this episode. So make sure whatever you do, stick around to the end and hear how to get that special gift. Again, let me simply say thanks for joining me on this episode. As you've already heard, we're talking about 5 realistic and clear expectations that can create a happier marriage. Now, having counseled and coached hundreds of couples over the past several years as a licensed marriage and family therapist and certified relationship coach, and from what I've experienced as a husband of more than 3 decades, I'm talking about 3 decades, I'm able to talk about topics like this, I believe, with confidence. And I hope you'll come to that realization at the end of this episode as well. Now, this topic is a very important one because, as I mentioned before, I've seen it many, many times come up in counseling, right? Because of the unexpressed expectations or unspoken expectations. And this is, can create, and you may have experienced this in your relationship, massive issues, right? So I believe that setting clear and realistic and clear expectations is a key factor in building a strong and happier marriage. Now, here's my view. Without clear expectations, you as a couple, as a spouse, will struggle with conflict and misunderstanding that you may have already experienced, led you to frustration, resentment, and even the breakdown of your relationship. If you've experienced that, say I. Who's that sound like? Tony Robbins, right? That's it. If you experienced that, just give me a nod. Okay, I get it. I see that nod out there. Now, by setting realistic expectations, I believe that you can create a shared vision with your spouse for your marriage. And you and your spouse can work together to achieve those goals that you've set, right? Because you have a clear and realistic expectation as to what that should look like. So in this episode, you can expect to learn about these 5 powerful, and I call them least talked about ways, and how realistic and clear expectations can create for you a happier marriage. You'll also gain, I believe, valuable insights and strategies that you can apply in your own marriage to build a stronger, happier, and more fulfilling relationship. So the 5 realistic and clear expectations, I'm going to tell you what they are, and then I'll break them down for you real quickly. So number 1, we're talking about handling surprises. Number 2, we're talking about household chores. Number 3, self-care. Number 4, communicating effectively. And number 5, managing finances. So let's dive into then these 5 realistic and clear expectations that I believe can create for you a happier marriage. So the first one is handling surprises. Now, I don't know about you, but for me in my marriage, my wife and I, and earlier on, we had to come to a way of deciding how are we going to handle surprises, right? Because surprises are what they are. Surprises, you don't expect them. You didn't know they were going to happen. You didn't see them coming. But I believe that there's something you can do to handle them, manage them, navigate them in a more helpful manner, right? So I think if you and your spouse will discuss, and my wife and I did this very thing, we discussed how we're going to handle unexpected situations that may arise in our marriage. And I believe you also have to sit down with your spouse and decide, hey, how are we going to handle unexpected situations? So you may want to make sure that that is a topic of conversations. One of the good things about this cards that I've created, Connect Strong cards, in there I have questions and then suggestions, some options, and then a other, meaning that you can always create your own response to the question that's on each card. And what happened is it talks about some of these things. So you may say one of the cards may have on there about this very topic of handling unexpected situations. And I make 3 suggestions as to what the answers could be. And you could decide to pick one of those or come up with your own. And every answer that you give, you've got to, or any option you choose, you've got to tell a story or give the context for your spouse to understand why is it you chose that option. So this is the same idea when you sit down with your spouse and have this conversation about how would you handle unexpected, situations or surprises that may arise in your marriage. What would you do, right? What might be first, step 1, step 2, step 3? What's the arrangement? So I want to suggest that you set realistic expectations for how you'll manage those surprises, right? For example, unexpected expenses that may come up, changes in your work schedules, family emergencies. What are the steps outlined? Now, I know it may not be perfect, right? Nothing is perfect, of course, but at least you have a framework. At least you have an idea of what you will do. It's like, for example, many schools have how to handle, a shooter, an active shooter situation. Or if you have some kind of disaster, and they'll tell the kids, what are the steps, a framework? Here are the things we will do if these things happen. Now, as you know, sometimes things don't go as planned, but at least there is a working idea of what would happen should in case that surprise did take place. And so I believe for your marriage, there needs to be a game plan. There needs to be a game plan of how you'll communicate with each other during these situations and how you support each other through any of these challenges that may come, right? This is what is important in how do you handle surprises. So I believe the first thing is having the conversation, and that's how you set an expectation for this idea of handling surprises. Number 2, household chores. I cannot tell you how many times I've counseled with couples who have talked about how this is a sore topic and an issue in their relationship. It has created for them frustration and resentment, anger. Sometimes they don't even have conversations for days just because of this unexpressed expectation. Now, there are expectations. Each spouse, you included, have your expectations in your mind. And sometimes the problem is it's in your mind. It's in your spouse's mind. It's not helpful being in your mind. It's not helpful being in his mind or her mind. It has to be out there. It has to be expressed. One of my favorite sayings that I came up with is this: unexpressed expectations leads to frustration, right? Because you're assuming that your spouse should know certain things, and you expect him or her to behave a certain way, but you haven't expressed that. And so it leads to frustration for both you and your partner. So what I suggest is have an open and honest conversation, right, with your partner about these expectations around household chores. Are you going to divide the chores? One of the things that I have, for me in my household, my wife and I, we're from Jamaica. If you haven't by now recognized the accent, I'm from Jamaica. And my wife is also from Jamaica. So we have something very similar in that Jamaican kind of cultural aspect of certain things, but that's where it ends because we were brought up in different households. And so there's an expectation about a husband's role and a wife's role, right? What is it what happens? And so a given stereotypical way is a wife takes care of inside the house, and the husband takes care of outside the house. That's typically how it's structured, right? I'm not saying it's right or wrong. It's just how it is. And typically I find in most cultures, especially outside the Western culture, I see it very, very much this way wherever I go, where I travel. This tend to be the way things are set up. And so sometimes, for example, I might be outside doing outside chores, and my wife will come outside, and not because I asked her to or told her to, but she'll come outside and she'll participate in the outside chores. Sometimes inside, when she's doing an inside chore, which is mainly what she does, and I do the outside, she may be sweeping the house, for example, and have swept the dust in a pile and is sweeping other areas of the house, and I just take the brush and the broom and scrape that up into a pick-upper kind of thing, right? Like a shovel-looking thing. I scrape it inside there and put it in the garbage. And we kind of share that without even discuss that. That's the idea of having a shared idea of we do this together. But you have to have an open conversation as what this should look like. Because sometimes it may be your wife may cook or you may cook, and your wife washes the dishes or your husband washes the dishes and clean up. Again, in my house, my wife, we joke about this very often because I said to her, honey, you are a messy cook. And she'll laugh and say, yes, I am. Because she will use a lot of utensils and then, cooking a delicious meal, which I enjoy. But then I look in the kitchen and the things are all over the place. So I'll go in sometimes while she's cooking and wash, or maybe afterwards I go and wash. Right now, I'm thankful our children, when they're much younger, when they were with us and growing up, we also delegated. That's one of the beautiful things when your kids are a bit older, delegate chores to them. And if your kids are not having chores, shame on you. You're not training them for the real world. They should and ought to have chores to learn how to be responsible. That's a whole different topic on parenting, and I won't go off tangent here. So there's also a need to be willing to compromise and find a solution that works best for both of you. Again, I mentioned about me and my wife, how we may work together on outside or inside. Is finding a solution that works best for both of us on something that we're working on. And sometimes you may want to consider creating a schedule or task list to ensure that both of you are involved in the process. So things are being done in a quote fair and even manner so that you don't feel as if you're just the one doing all the work and vice versa. And he's making a mess or she's making a mess and, you have to end up cleaning up. No, it's very well much divided, but I think it's important to talk about these things. And sometimes I believe in premarital counseling so much because these are some of the things that ought to go over these things before you get married. The third thing is self-care. And this is a very big one because many couples do not make time for self-care, right? Taking care of yourself and pursuing that individual personal development, right? Time for yourself. I call it, we have a we time and a me time. A we time is when we do things together. A me time is when I do things for myself and my wife does things for herself. Why? So we can be able to get out there and recharge and feel refreshed and then come back and deposit that into the relationship. So self-care is important and it's not a selfish thing. It's really a necessary thing for the relationship's sake. You're doing self-care for your relationship, for your marriage. It's not just for you, right? When you self-care, whether it's physically and otherwise, your spouse looks on and is admiring that because he or she recognize you're finding a path that doesn't necessarily also always depend on them to make things happen for you or to make you happy. Is find things that make yourself happy. So set realistic expectations for how you'll spend your free time. Some couples say, we always want to be together. Everywhere we go, that is unsustainable. And after a time, somebody is going to want their space. So when you say, I've got to be always with my husband or always with my wife, my friend, it's a noble idea. It sounds very utopian kind of thing, but in real life, it doesn't happen. And really, you are an individual who ought to still be developing yourself. And that's why self-care is so important. So pursue hobbies or activities that bring you joy and fulfillment, right? And again, do this on your own or with a group of other people. Is just be able to carve a path that involves you taking care of yourself. If you're into massages, go get a massage. If you're into manicure, pedicure, go get one, right? Because again, it's for yourself. And you're now bringing that self back into your marriage. Number 4, communicating effectively. Now, you've heard this part before, I'm sure. People talk about effective communication. I go a step further and talk about empathic communication. But I use effective here because it's something that you can very much easily relate to because it's used so often. So you want to set expectations for how you communicate with each other, right? Being honest, respectful, open-minded, a good listener, right? Listening to each other and validating each other's feelings, showing respect for each other and your point of view. You don't have to agree, but there's a need to acknowledge. But you've got to be able to set expectations on what that should look like. I call that, again, is the rules of engagement. What would that look like when you're having a disagreement? How are you going to manage and navigate that moment? So when you're able to talk about this idea and expectations of what will happen when you're in a conflict, then when that conflict arises, there are no surprises. I like that. When that conflict arises, there are no surprises. I like that. I said it one more time. Here we go. It's almost like you could rap to that. When these conflict arises, there is no surprises. Here. I'd like to have fun sometimes, and I hope you're having fun with me. But when this conflict arises, there should be no surprise as to how you're going to manage them, as to what happens in disengaging and re-engaging into that moment, to take a time out for the relationship's sake. Those are things that needs to be clearly expressed and have an expectation of what needs to happen so that when the moment comes, again, there are no surprises. When the conflict arises, there's no surprise. There you go. I hope that's an easy way to remember that. But again, it's not just around conflict, is other things as well. For example, being honest about whatever it is, or being respectful and again, open-minded. Closed-mindedness and this fixed mindset doesn't work in a relationship. There's got to be a growth mindset, right? A fixed mindset is almost like the rigidity. I've always done it this way kind of thing. A growth mindset is open to new ideas and growth. And you should be a growth-minded individual. Every marriage should be growth-minded, not fixed-minded. So Kingsley, that's a marriage you're talking about. Yes, I know. Because I see marriage as almost like I kind of create a personality for a marriage. Because I think that marriage, if it's seen as an entity, and as you and both are kind of working toward making sure this entity succeed, then it ought to have a growth-minded approach towards it for it to be successful. Now, before I share with you the fifth way that I have, fifth idea of expectations that are clear and realistic, and how that's going to help you create a much stronger, happier marriage. So in speaking about the idea of communicating effectively, let me suggest strongly that you take the marriage assessment quiz that is designed to help you gauge the state of your marriage with a numeric score. And then it's going to provide you with guidance and what you do next, right? Or your next step should be. This again is communication. This is about expectations as well for your marriage. So this quiz, you'll not only get a numeric score, but a downloadable PDF that explains your score, and then some follow-up emails with additional resources and outlines what your next step should be if you so choose. if you so choose, right? If this marriage means a lot to you, then I want to encourage you to start with that marriage assessment quiz. And you can access the quiz at happiermarriagesecrets.com/quiz. happiermarriagesecrets.com/quiz. And the link will also be provided in the description that follows this episode. So number 5, expectation. So we talked about so far. Number 1 is handling surprises. Number 2, household chores. Number 3, self-care. Number 4, communicating effectively. And here, number 5 is managing finances. This is a very important aspect of relationships, as you are very much aware. The standing study is that 50% of all marriages end in divorce. But a high percentage of why those divorces have taken place, guess what? What it's about. If you said finances, you are correct. Finances is one of the things that many marriages fail as a result of. Someone mismanaged the finances. There's some issues or a stressor that came around a financial issue that led to a divorce. So I want to suggest set clear expectations of how you're going to manage your finances as a couple. Again, these are things that should be done in a premarital setting. Unfortunately, you're past that stage. But I recommend strongly that every couple who are getting married should do premarital counseling and cover these topics as well, right? So the finances, as for a couple, for example, creating a budget, agreeing on who is going to pay the bills. It doesn't have to be stereotypically where the man take care of all the finances because he's a man. Come on now. If you as a husband is not good in financial and numbers, you ought not to be managing the finances. Your wife, if she is better at that, should be the one. Preach it, brother, preach it. Yeah, it's really true. It so happened in our marriage, my wife allows me to handle the financial aspects of things because I love math. I love math going through school, and I think I'm pretty good at math. And she recognized that right away. So she decided to default that aspect of the relationship to me to manage the finances. Doesn't mean that she is not aware of what's happening in the finances. I keep her up to date. She can write the checks. She can access the account. She sees what's going on financially. So you need to set clear expectations of, do you operate on a budget? Should there be a budget around certain spending? Should there be a limit on what spending should look like? My wife and I have this set this thing together really early in our relationship, where we decided that if we're going to make an expense that's above a certain amount of money, we're going to consult with each other. We're not just going to go and spend this amount of money without having first a discussion about the matter. She may at times just kind of, default to, okay, honey, you go ahead and just do that. Or I may do the very same thing. But we have this idea that we are going to discuss. And so the expectation is there'll be no surprises. Doesn't mean no ever happen, because sometimes I may surprise her with something that's, fairly expensive in our budget, and she may do the very same thing. So these are exceptions to everything, right? That's how life is. But in general, we have this guidelines, this operating rule, this rules of engagement when it comes to finances, that we don't purchase things that are above a certain amount of money without consulting with each other. Be also transparent about your individual financial situations. I cannot tell you how many couples that I've worked with and have listened to who have said, my wife or my husband doesn't know I have this money hidden over here. Now, I know this could be a whole episode by itself, because there are situations where I understand there are exceptions to everything, but I'm speaking more from a general standpoint here, that there should not be secret accounts in your marriage where you have this money hidden over here and your husband have this money hidden over here. Here's my thing. What if either of you died unexpectedly? What happens? If your husband doesn't know about that, or your wife doesn't know about that, then what happens? To be as transparent as possible and making certain that everything is accounted for in your relationship. So find a solution that works for both of you. Now, I'm not here to tell you what to do in your relationship. As a counselor and a coach, I don't tell people what to do, but I make suggestions. We can co-create options, and they can choose from that. But managing finances is very important. And sometimes you may need to seek the help of a financial advisor or counselor, because they can also help you to manage your finances if you're struggling with that. But whatever you do, my friend, there's got to be this idea, of managing finances, because it is a big thing in relationships, as you may have already experienced, or as you know, coming into this, listening to this episode. This is one of those things you probably are very much aware of. I cannot tell you how many times I've heard, this is my account, this is her account. And again, I understand that. There are exceptions, but I have a hard time. I still struggle after all these many years of doing counseling and myself as being married. I cannot find a strong enough argument. Again, I want to say there are exceptions, but strong enough argument for this continuation of his, her, mine, yours, because that is what you do when you're single. But when you're married and you're merging together as one, you're going to expect to do we, us, ours. That's why you got married. And I get off my soapbox and come back to what we're talking about here today. So you have heard then how I believe these 5 expressed expectations can truly transform your relationship. It will help you to build a stronger, happier, and more fulfilling marriage. And the 5 expectations are, again, handling surprises, household chores, self-care, communicating effectively, and managing finances. So I would love to hear from you what your thoughts are on these. Are you doing any of these things? How are they working in your relationship? Does any of these resonate with you? So I would love to hear what you would say the most helpful part of this episode was for you. Let me know what you say is the most helpful and which of these you might need to work on. And again, if you need some help, you can always get some help from an outside source, someone like myself, who can help you to coach you through or counsel you through these areas I've mentioned today. So, my friend, that said, I want to say thank you for taking the time to listen and join me in this episode. Again, you can access the quiz at happiermarriagesecrets.com, happiermarriagesecrets.com/quiz. That will give you an immediate score for your relationship. And it's under 90 seconds. You can complete this in under 90 seconds. And a PDF will also be made available to you, and the follow-up emails that I mentioned that will tell you more about what needs to happen. So thanks again for listening. And the announcer will now tell you how to get the free gift that I had mentioned just for staying to the end. Now let's make marriages happier again. And here is the announcer.
We've come to the end of another exciting show, and if you enjoyed this podcast, 1. Make sure you give this show a rating and review. 2. Subscribe to the show to get all new releases. And 3. Get your complimentary copy of the 5 Secrets to a Happier Marriage ebook at kingsleygrant.com/HMS ebook. Again, it's kingsleygrant.com/HMS ebook. See the link in the show notes. Do it today. Don't delay. Thanks so much for listening, and make sure you tell one other spouse about this show, or better yet, share it with them. Until next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you, and make his face shine on you and be gracious to you. May he turn his face toward you and give you his peace, both now and forever.